Hi, everyone. I am Kathryn Rose, CEO and founder of WiseHer, and we provide on-demand expert advice to help women accelerate their business or career growth. Our nearly 1,000 experts from around the world help support folks with their affordable one-on-one advice that helps them go farther, faster in their business or career. And I want to welcome everyone to today's Ask the Expert Live, and I'm excited today to have with me on this Get Wise Wednesday, Radhika Dutt, WiseHer expert, entrepreneur, innovator, and creator of the Radical Product Thinking methodology, and author of the upcoming book, Radical Product Thinking, the new mindset for innovating smarter. Welcome, Radhika.
Thanks, Kathryn. Glad to be here.
Great. So tell us a little bit more about yourself. I mean, I know you, but I'd like everyone out there to know you a little bit more.
Okay, great. So my background is that I've been an entrepreneur. I've started companies and I've been part of 4 acquisitions. 2 of those were companies that I'd founded. So my background is that, having built products in so many different industries and sizes of companies, from startups to, multinationals, what I found was I kept running into the same sort of problems. And so radical product thinking was basically a way of saying, well, is it that there are just a few people who can build great products and, it's those few visionaries like Steve Jobs and Elon Musk, or is it that, we can each learn to build successful products really systematically? So is this a skill that can be taught? And so that's how radical product thinking came about. And so today I am an advisor to startups, and I also work with the Singaporean Central Bank. And the idea is, no matter kind of whether it's small companies, governments, etc., we can apply product thinking to create change very systematically. And so that's about me.
Well, that's interesting. And I mean, I know you helped me a lot when I was first starting WiseHer. We met, I think, at a networking event, and you had offered generously to spend some time with me and kind of take me through the process. So talk a little bit more about this methodology and how it might differ from some of the things that are out there now about creating innovative products.
Yeah, thank you, Kathryn. And at the time, it was many, many years ago. And in fact, you were one of my first guinea pigs where I was saying, well, we're starting to create this methodology and, we tried it out together. And I'm so glad to hear that it's been helpful for you. And it just kind of took off since then, and it's organically grown where it's people around the world who've found it. But basically, the approach is, as you would remember, is, how entrepreneurship is done. And what we've always heard in entrepreneurship is, let's just try things in the market. Let's just put a product out there, see what works, and then we'll just iterate and figure it out.
Okay.
And the problem with this approach is it just means that we keep trying things, but especially if you're an entrepreneur, and all of us entrepreneurs know this, there are only so many things you can try before you run out of money and momentum, right? And typically you have 2 or 3 pivots before you're out of both. And so you really have to use those silver bullets so carefully. And so instead of let's just try what works, the whole approach to radical product thinking is, let's be vision driven instead, meaning let's take a systematic approach to translating that vision into action. And what that means is starting with a really clear vision for what's the change we want to bring about, then translating into a strategy, and then into, how will you translate that into your decision making, and then finally into iterative execution and measurement. And you can apply each of these ideas into your culture as well. But you asked me what is different, because a lot of these words that one uses, like vision, strategy, you've heard them before. And so what's really different is, when I say we need a clear vision, I am very much against a lot of the conventional wisdom that's out there about what's a good vision. So, we often hear, a vision has to be broad and aspirational. And especially as a startup, right? That's what you always hear.
Right. I was going to say, yeah, that's what we always hear. Yeah.
And so you hear words like, what's your BHAG, your big, hairy, audacious goal? And I'm really against that sort of terminology. Instead, I want you to say, a good vision is one that's super detailed. It's not this big aspirational goal like, I want to empower humans to express ourselves. that's really not a vision. Instead, a vision is something where you answer questions like the who, what, why, when, and how. Meaning, whose world are you trying to change? What does their world look like? Meaning, what problem do they have, and what are they doing today to solve that problem? Why does this need changing? Why does the status quo need changing? Because really, maybe it doesn't even need changing, let's face it. And then finally, how will you change this world? When will you know that you've achieved your vision? And so that is what I mean by a detailed vision. And so radical product thinking, when we created this methodology, it was really to give people a step-by-step to answer these questions, give you a fill-in-the-blank statement so that you can create such a vision. Everything is designed to be really practical so you can apply these ideas.
So give us an example of one of those kind of fill in the blank. So we start off with the vision, as you said, it's the who, what, why, and how. Is that
when and how?
When
exactly.
and how. Sorry, I missed the when. I apologize.
That's okay.
And so when we're thinking about this, so let's start with just the who, just a brief example of like one of those fill in the blank kind of things, because I know when we started working together, I thought I had all that, right? Because I followed that old methodology with the vision and the big, hairy, audacious goals and all that. But when we sat down, I started filling out those fill in the blank statements. I realized that I really didn't have it all done.
I love that you said that, Kathryn, because that's exactly the point of the exercise, because it really makes you realize how much you don't know about your vision, how much you have not defined about it. And so these questions are really designed to ask you profound questions that you discover, and you really create alignment in your team by talking through those questions. So let's talk about an example, right? So I'll actually share with you the vision statement that I had for a startup that I'd founded. And then sold in 2014. So the vision statement would read like this. Today, when amateur wine drinkers want to find wines that they're likely to like, they have to try attractive looking wine bottles at the store or wines that are on sale. This is unacceptable because it leads to so many disappointments. We envision a world where finding wines you like is as easy as finding movies you like on Netflix. We're bringing about this world by matching wines to your taste and an operational setup that delivers these wines to your door. Now, the thing about this vision, right, is that I had not told you anything about my startup. And yet, hopefully at the end of this vision, you knew exactly what we were doing and who we were doing this for and, what our solution was, right? So you asked me the question about, well, tell me about one example of this who. So you saw that in the who, like today when, I talked about amateur wine drinkers. That's a very specific set of users. And actually, when I talk to my team about it, I go a level deeper. I talk about it as it's people who are interested in wine, but they're not experts. On a scale of 1 to 10, they're like the 2 to a 6 level of wine knowledge. They're mostly women. You really want to describe your audience to that level of detail because it's an identifiable group whose problem you're setting out to solve. A common mistake, if you're doing this, have a big, hairy, audacious goal, is we'll just say, today when consumers, right? And that's just not detailed enough.
It's too broad. It's too broad. I mean, you also mentioned about some other methodologies, and I know when I first started out, I would look at the lean startup, and obviously it's very effective and helpful. But I know that your vision is and your methodology is a little bit different because, as you were saying, it's not try something, see if it works, and then iterate out of that. Talk a little bit about how it differs.
Yeah. So one of the most important things, and I'll be very explicit in saying this, I think the whole lean startup approach, yes, it's super helpful, but it's very much a white male tech bro angle that works for people who are able to raise large sums of money. Now, honestly, as women, it is harder to raise money. You have to be really careful with your money because, you don't have this large swaths that are available at your disposal where, let's just try something and see what works. And frankly, even when that is the case, research has shown that if you have lots of money behind your startup, it doesn't actually make it more successful. So where is lean startup helpful? When you have a really clear vision and strategy, Lean Startup is super helpful in helping you define the smallest possible test that you can do to validate your vision and strategy, and then continuously make improvements. So
Okay.
that's where it excels. What has been missing until now is that upstream work to be able to define a really clear vision and strategy that you can then translate into lean and agile execution. And so I don't see these methodologies as either or. I actually see these as working together. And in most organizations, I use both of those methodologies. So I define vision and strategy using radical product thinking, translate it into my agile sprints, for example, and what we're going to achieve in each sprint. And then I use lean and agile to define the smallest minimum viable product and plan sprints to execute and measure.
I see what you're saying. So the radical product thinking kind of helps you with that framework. And then if you want to implement things like the lean startup, some of those things, it's more about the execution. And I also think that, as an entrepreneur, there's a million things you can do, right? And what's been really helpful for me through radical product thinking is at times I will go back and I will pull out those sheets that we talked about. And I'll, have to sit down with myself and say, am I still on that right vision? You know what I mean? And it doesn't mean that I can't grow or even pivot a little bit, but the focus of the original sort of vision and that statement that we just talked about, I feel like it helps me kind of decide what we're going to be, iterating into the product and what we're not. So.
Exactly. And I love that you say that, you actually go back to that vision, because this is exactly kind of what it was intended for. That, time passes and you might go back and you actually change some of those words in your vision. You learn more about the market, the problem that you're solving, and some of the answers to your who, what, why, when, and how might actually change. And so that's okay. And so what you said, about pivoting, I love that, because one of the product diseases I talk about is pivotitis. This is the product disease that happens when we, just keep changing direction to kind of see what works, and it leads to confused customers and demoralized teams, right? And what you just described about going back to that vision and then very thoughtfully making changes to it and then communicating it to your team, that's exactly the approach to help you prevent pivotitis, because you keep because every change that you make and a pivot that you make, it's vision driven, as opposed to, now we'll just change direction and do this or do that. But when you communicate kind of how your vision has changed and why you're changing this direction, it's really helpful for the team because it doesn't demoralize them.
I think that's it's a great point. And I mean, for us, I went back and looked at it because through the pandemic, what we realized was that it wasn't just women who needed assistance. It was, small businesses, entrepreneurs, folks who needed affordable advice because, they're running into the situation where, they're just trying to keep their head above water. Right. And of course, underrepresented founders overall have these challenges. So we just iterated our vision statement rather than our product. And I think it really helped us a lot. You talked about product diseases. And so pivotitis was one of them. Talk a little bit more about other things that you see as product diseases and how we can avoid them.
Yeah, so in the book, I talk about 7 diseases that I keep seeing repeatedly. I'll mention a few of them. So another disease is strategic swelling. So strategic swelling is one where, when we don't have a really clear vision and strategy, what happens is we may start off with a product and then your customer says, oh, if you just add this one other feature, I could also use this product to do blah. And I could use it to do this. And so soon your product starts to grow and grow and grow until you just no longer recognize it. And it could make you coffee one day if you ask for it nicely. And so it does so much that you no longer recognize it. That's strategic swelling.
Well, I actually wanted to stop you right there because I think, I've been selling into the enterprise for 20 years in software and different kinds of things. And I think that that's a really, really important point to bring up. Because customers are always going to ask you for different things. And sometimes you just have to sit back and take a breath and think, is this a deal breaker? Does it have to happen? How many other people would want this feature? So I'm not adding it in just because one person asked for it or two people asked for it. And is it actually going to make me money? You know what I mean? Is it going to prevent the customer from leaving and displacing me for someone else? Is it going to, affect them spending more money with me later? Like, those are the kinds of things I think, your methodology really helps. But that strategic swelling, I think, it's a really big product disease, especially, a lot of us tech founders have. So thank you for bringing that up.
And I love, what you just talked about, some of those symptoms that you described of, customers saying, well, if you do this for me, I'll buy, or, having to make those trade-offs. Do I do this custom feature for a customer or not? I call that disease obsessive sales disorder. And this happens when we keep trading off the long-term vision in exchange for the short-term gains, right? Where a customer's, your salesperson has this glimmer in their eye and they say to you, if you just add this one feature, we'll win this mega deal. And so soon, you're sitting with a stack of contracts and your entire roadmap is driven by all of these one-off features. But this is not to say that we should never do this custom feature.
Right.
It's just you take on what I call vision debt. As a tech founder, you often come across technical debt, which is basically where you take technical shortcuts on your product. Vision debt is similar in that you're deviating from the vision in the short term, but the longer you take on this vision debt and the more of it you take on, it's like compounding interest. It takes you further and further away from your vision until you kind of lose what you stand for in your product.
And I think that's important too, because, it's not to say that you can't return, on your product and your vision and your, into your investors and all those kinds of things, sticking to your original vision. And I think that sometimes happens, especially if you do take on outside money. You'll have all of these, you have all of these outside voices coming to you and saying, oh, well, you need to do this and you need to do that. Go faster, go faster. And I think what you're saying is to make sure that you're staying true to the vision, because in theory, when you actually do this exercise, you found out through this exercise that you do have product market fit, right? That you do have people who want to buy into your original vision. So the farther and farther you get away from it, the more challenging it becomes to keep it in sight.
Exactly. And one of the things I actually use to be able to avoid this disease is using tools for communicating when we're going too far away from our vision, and figuring out, across our organization, across the team, like, what are the right trade-offs between vision and that immediate business need that you might have. Because the reality is, right, the vision, strategy, those are the longer term things. Think of that on the y-axis, that's your vision fit. Your x-axis is about your survival, right? This is whether you make your quarterly goals, whether you survive as a company even, right? And that's an important factor to really think about. And so when you look at this X and Y axis, things that are a good vision fit and it's helping you survive, of course, that's ideal. But if you always focus on just that ideal quadrant, then you're still always focusing on the short term. So sometimes you have to invest in the vision, which is where it's a good vision fit, but it's not helping you survive in the short term. So this is where, for example, you might tell yourself, okay, I need 3 months to just refactor my code. I can't develop new features, but you're doing this because it's going to help you in the longer term. You can develop features much faster, and you have to take that 3-month hit. You're investing in the vision. And vision debt is the opposite of that quadrant, which is where it's helping you survive. This is that mega deal that your salesperson is telling you about, but maybe it requires you to add a feature that's really bad for your vision. And so you're in that quadrant where, it's helping you survive, not good for your vision, you're taking on vision debt. And so none of these quadrants are bad per se. It's just you communicate to your team, based on your particular situation, how much can you afford to take on, right? As a founder, if you're truly bootstrapping and cash strapped, well, you may have to take on more vision debt. But the most important thing is you're being mindful of the vision debt you're taking on. And this way you acknowledge that to your whole team so that your team doesn't think you're just losing confidence in your product market fit. And that's the point that you were bringing up, Kathryn, that, you may already have product market fit. How do you make sure your team doesn't lose confidence that we're just sort of going everywhere?
So you're communicating with your team. Look, I know that we are succumbing in some ways to this disease, but this is why.
Yeah, and almost, the thing is, once you start communicating in this way, and here's why we're taking on vision debt, it's no longer a disease so much, it's very purposeful. You're starting to be purposeful about taking on vision debt. And your team, you can have that discussion. Here's when we're taking on vision debt. How will we invest in the vision at times so that we're making up for some of this? It's important to have those open discussions on the team. Exactly. And one of the other things, by the way, when you take this approach of talking about it, is that you actually end up having a much better alignment across your team, so that even if you're not in some of those meetings, when your developer is making decisions and you're not there, they're thinking about your same rationale for how you're making decisions. You're really helping give your team an intuition for how you make decisions.
Yeah, well, obviously communication in the team is so important in general, but staying true to that vision. I think one of the things though is how do you know that you've actually caught a disease? When you're in, it's this this swirling thing of you have customers and you have investors and then you have your own vision, and would you recommend that folks kind of stop and maybe when they schedule their next team meeting to really bring these things to the forefront and say, hey, are we, once they do their vision statement through the radical product methodology, are we true to this vision? And then really kind of sit with that and figure out whether or not they are, in situations where they have these product diseases?
Absolutely. Sometimes a team even thinks, look, I have a vision. Why are we going back to the vision statement? And sometimes you even have to preempt that conversation to be able to say, well, let's talk about these product diseases and which of these product diseases are we seeing in the organization. So in fact, in the book, I start with those product diseases as a way of doing a diagnosis, because anytime you're bringing in change, right, even radical product thinking, you're bringing in a new methodology in the organization, there's always resistance to change. And so instead of starting with change first, talking about what's the problem we have in our organization, why do we even need to talk about the vision? And so talking about those product diseases and having those open conversations. And after that, talking about, okay, so we agree we have these diseases. This is why we need to talk about the vision. And then going into those visioning exercises, I found that then you have more traction and buy-in for even doing those, for having those discussions.
Great. So, we worked together, like you said, it was a few years ago, and I know it was kind of a new thing, and since then you've been using this over and over again. What inspired you to write this as a book?
One thing was, well, there were two main things, right? So one was, as this was a methodology that was starting to become adopted around the world, a lot of people would often reach out saying, can you give me a filled in version of each of these worksheets so that I can see how you fill this out? So clearly there was a need for a voiceover beyond the toolkit. The toolkit, by the way, is available for free from the website, so you can just download it from radicalproduct.com. So that was one reason, because people wanted that whole voiceover on how do you fill this all out and how do you apply this methodology. But the second reason, right, was something that I mentioned early on in this conversation, where I find that a lot of business books are written for tech bros by tech bros, and we really need a different approach. One of the things that I was really striving for is to provide examples from around the world for what it means to build vision-driven products. Our examples today are really Silicon Valley, California centric, where we talk about unicorns and, being that unicorn is the goal of the company. Whereas if we think about radical product thinking, your product is your mechanism for creating change in the world, right? And you can build successful companies, and you can do this in a way that truly inspires you. And so when you think about your product as a mechanism for creating change, you build products that are more vision driven, and this approach really helps you achieve that. And so I wanted to give a global perspective that covers, nonprofits, successful governments, and successful companies. And I'll give you one example of an organization that I covered. maybe all of us are familiar with papadums, the lentil crackers you get in Indian restaurants that you dip in chutney. Yeah. So there is a company not a company, an organization that owns 60% market share of papadums. It's an organization that has like 220 million in revenues in India. And the way it started was 8 women who were all, just barely literate. They didn't have an education, from low-income households, but they started this organization because they wanted to earn a dignified living for themselves, and cooking they felt was their one skill. Today, this organization has given financial independence to more than 45,000 women.
Wow.
And they've built this amazing organization with such strong market share. We can build successful companies that create change in the world. And this was an example of how they're incredibly vision-driven in how they achieve change.
Yeah, well, and that's an amazing story, and I didn't know that. So I think that's but I also think that it goes back to what you said. You can have these world-changing products and make sure that you're sticking true to the vision. But when you talk about world-changing products, I know one of your original startups was a wine startup. So when you talk about world-changing products, what exactly do you mean?
Yeah, that you have a very clear picture of whose world you're trying to change and how you want to change their world, right? Like, you have an end picture of what that world looks like. In our case, yes, we were a wine startup, but we had a very clear target. It was amateur wine drinkers. It was mostly women. These people wanted to learn about wine, didn't want the pretentious stuff on Wine Spectator. They just wanted to learn organically and by tasting wines, etc. But what I mean by changing the world in the way that inspires you is that I want us to first envision what the world is that we want to create. Let me give you an example that's very different from my wine startup. Facebook has this vision that they started with of an open and connected world. But the reality is, it doesn't explain what does that world look like in the end. Like, if you were to hang mission accomplished, what does that world look like? Open and connected does not describe that to me. So when we start organizations or companies without clearly picturing the end state we want to bring about, we often end up creating what I call digital pollution, which is we create collateral damage to the world through our products. And that's the piece that we really need to be more mindful of and thoughtful about in terms of how we create products, because our products affect people's lives. They affect societies. They may erode privacy. They may be creating more polarization, both wealth and ideological. There's so many elements of digital pollution that I talk about in the book, but everything that we build in terms of product, if we start to think about our product not just as the end goal, but we think about our product as a mechanism for change, then we must start with a clear vision for what's the change we want to bring about.
I think, obviously that's really important, that clear vision of the change, because as you mentioned with Facebook, I think there are some unintended consequences there, right? And I think it's important that we keep those things in mind as well and stay on that vision. Well, I know we've only have a couple minutes left, but I wanted to thank you for stopping by on Ask the Expert Live this week. And just to kind of wrap it up, can you give us your top 3 to 5 tips and things that folks should keep in mind when starting to design innovative and world-changing products?
So maybe the top tips, right? The first thing is, if you're doing this, well, I've talked about imagining the change that you want to bring about. But the second thing, right, is most likely you're not working alone in building your product. Whether it's your just advisors or friends who are helping you, or you have a whole team, the way you can really align them is by being able to talk about your vision. And you should be able to describe your vision in such a way that other people can describe it back to you in their own words. So that's a key tip. When you're working with your team, make sure people can describe the vision in their own words without, using a slogan. And that really means that they have internalized it, that they believe in it. And that makes sure that you're starting to create that alignment. Because the thing is, you have to bring your whole team with you on the journey. So those are the main things. And the one last thing I'll say is, if you want to innovate, you really have to create psychological safety in the team so that people can speak up, disagree with you, that you have to build that security in yourself as a leader. And so this is something where, to build that psychological safety in the team, I talk about tips on how you can do that in the book as well. But without that, it's really hard to do innovation, because then the best ideas are only coming from you, as opposed to if you have psychological safety, your entire team is contributing to great ideas and innovation.
Fantastic. So when is the book coming out?
So the book comes out on September 28th, so just a little over a month from now. And one other thing I'll say is I'm looking for a few other people to join my launch team to help me promote the book. So if you're interested, just ping me. And I have a really wonderful group of people who are vision-driven around the world, and you'll get to meet other interesting people as part of the launch team.
Well, sign us up. I'm a huge fan. And Radhika is an expert on Wise Her. So please, I'm just putting her link here in the comments. And so please, if you wanted to dive a little bit deeper into radical product thinking, please schedule a call with Radhika. And until next time on Ask the Expert Live, thank you again so much for joining us. We do 1 to 2 shows a week that focus on topics that help folks accelerate their business or career. And if you want to keep up with our topics and get on the list and get reminders, please go to goasktheexpert.com. Thank you so much again, Radhika, and thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you, Kathryn. This was lovely.